Hello and welcome to our on-location broadcast, Critical Contract Concerns. We're here at PCMA, Convening Leaders in Pittsburgh, at the wonderful Grand Concourse Restaurant. Look at this view out here in a former rail station, the former Pittsburgh and Lake Erie train station. It's really a great location if you want to check it out in Station Square. So thank you for joining us for our broadcast. And we'll have I'll introduce our speakers here soon, and then join us later for Visit Pittsburgh. They have a great message for you at the end of the broadcast. So let's kick it off with Eric Rosenberg first and Joshua Grimes. Eric, just what is it you do in this industry?
Thanks for asking. My family always asks that. So I had my own corporate event agency for 20 years, and then stopped doing that. I wrote a book that made bestseller, and I'm launching an online course to help independent meeting planners to manage and grow their business. And
you have a column in our magazine on that subject also.
Absolutely.
Monthly, yes.
Thank you very much for that, absolutely. And then on the other hand, I'm also opening the US for a ticketing platform in Europe, from Europe, that actually working for the Champions League, the Ryder Cup, and has integrated blockchain into the security of the ticketing already.
So in other words, you've been a busy guy lately, huh?
Trying to, yes.
And then over here we have noted industry attorney Joshua Grimes. So and you're with Grimes Law Offices in Philadelphia?
That's correct. Good morning. I have a nationwide legal practice that focuses on the meetings and events industry. I also represent other facets of the hospitality industry, some hotel properties as well. I do a lot of corporate training on issues, everything from contracting to cybersecurity now and risk management, so all parts of the industry, and speak around the country as well.
And also you have done a number of webinars for us.
I have.
Thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Well, the topic today is critical contract concerns, and I know all of you out there, who view our webinars, who read our magazine, everyone always wants to know about contract clauses, contract concerns, everything about contract. It's always our most popular topic, so thanks for joining us today for that.
Of course.
And I think maybe the first thing we'll start off with is cybersecurity, and that's been in the news, that massive data breach that happened for the Starwood customers. Joshua, what is your take on that? How can meeting planners protect their clients?
Okay, well, we're getting some real Pittsburgh behind us with the freight train.
We had to pay extra for the train.
That's
actually. I hope you guys
Perfect
appreciate
timing.
that.
Good timing.
Thank you.
Well, the first thing that people should understand is that data breaches are a fact of life, not just in the hospitality industry, in every industry. And we've, as you said, Tyler, we found out about a breach with Starwood, with Marriott, and we found out a few days ago that it also impacted, as well as other things, passport information and other information. So the critical thing is to acknowledge this is an issue we have to deal with, and then to deal with it. Our meetings, by their nature, include personal data. Names, email addresses, physical addresses, credit card information, passport information, all valuable data. And everybody in the industry, planners, suppliers, needs to proactively address how you're going to do data security. Mm-hmm. Examine hotels and venues beforehand for possible ways theft could get out. Ask questions about what measures your contractors take to protect data. Use contracts to allocate risk. If there's GDPR compliance required, make sure that that's being done. So there's a number of steps, and then again in contracts, indemnification's the best word we lawyers have, because nobody understands what it means. That the people, you allocate risk by contract. So the bottom line is there's a lot of responsibility, and it has to be dealt with hopefully beforehand, before a breach occurs, to protect data.
And especially with GDPR, you operate a lot in the international kind of arena for meetings too. And what does this whole data protection law mean for people who plan international meetings?
Well, the whole GDPR, first of all, people would think here, oh, it's only for people in Europe.
Right.
Then they realize it's not only for people in Europe, it's if you have attendees from Europe.
Yeah.
And then they say, well, if we have to go far, then let's go where they're asking for. So there's a lot of organization in North America that are operating globally, that they went the whole way. It said, let's be compliant with GDPR. It's basically the most restrictive law that you can think of. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, it is what you can do yourself and where you're providing the information or not, and what you cannot control. What you were just talking about is something that I cannot control if they have my data, which they need to operate. So it's two different things. And to Josh's point, I think at the end of the day, for any independent meeting planners or anybody in our industry, as a matter of fact, is what can you do to be more secure at the beginning? And at the end of the day, when it comes to responsibility, who's responsible for that? But it's a big question, because that is something that people will try to shift their responsibility, or say, if you don't take responsibility for that, I'm not going to take the contract. And the lawyer's going to say, well, in that case, we're not signing the contract. Might be a lot of impact on your business.
And how about when it comes to like the meeting planner? What do they need to know? How do they need to communicate this to the stakeholders? Does every single meeting have to go through a team of lawyers for any of these issues?
Well, we would hope it does. But
there you go.
Having said that, you set me up.
We'll put
for
your
that
card
one.
up.
That's right. No, I mean, it's what you negotiate, but it's a tough one, because look, we see hotel contracts, we see venue contracts where the venue says, we have our own privacy practices and this is what we're going to do, and we won't agree to other things. And then it becomes a negotiation, because many of us deal with large corporations that have these MSAs, the master service agreements, where they have their own requirements about data privacy. So there has to be a meeting of the mind. But for planners, I think the first thing you do is minimize the private data that gets sent to any sort of contractor, venue or others. If a contractor doesn't need the physical address of attendees, or they don't need passport information, don't give it to them.
Right.
And that's for your own protection, not because you don't trust them.
Yeah.
And then test things out. Ask, do they run an antivirus on their computers? Many of us use the public computers at a hotel or any other property.
Or airport,
Do they run can someone tap into the network? A pirate tap into that network? So planners need to do due diligence, but ultimately, as Eric said, get in the contract what the requirements are and who's going to be responsible.
And I've sat in on a lot of seminars on this at industry events, and I've even heard like kind of draconian measures where it's just like only use thumb drives and don't let anyone use the Wi-Fi, and how far does it go? I mean,
it depends who you're working with.
Yeah.
People that they first want to be protected whatever happens.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's good for business. And to come back to what you were saying about the independent meeting planners, if you look at even 10 years ago, what meeting planner should know,
right?
What we should know today. I mean, you need an MBA, then you need a master in law, and it's impossible. So you need to be aware of all the different areas that you should advise your clients on.
And the stakeholders and right.
And then you work with partners in the different field and the specialists, because you cannot know everything about everything.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we're coming about why are we doing a meeting?
Right.
And sometimes, all those legal aspects are forgetting about that. So coming back to the essential, and then but we need to be protected. So we have a partner for the law, and we're going to ask them what to do.
Right.
And I would just say, there's nothing wrong during the RFP process or during site visits asking, have there been incidents with cyber hacking in a venue? In fact, you may remember about 2 or 3 years ago, Marriott instituted an effort to keep out third-party AV companies in their facilities, and some people thought it was because they wanted to charge extra, but what Marriott said, and I think now it rings true, is they also wanted to protect people from unauthorized hacking in their facilities. And I think it makes sense, but to go back to the other point that was just made, during the site visit process, you can ask, has there been an history of cyber theft? Stand outside the meeting rooms and see what networks you're picking up.
Yeah.
And do your due diligence, because we could put in a contract all the damages you want and all the draconian provisions, as you guys put that. But at the end of the day, you want no incidents. So
Right.
what do you need to do so there will be hopefully no incidents? And then if there are, you worry about it later.
I remember a webinar with Michael Owen about cybersecurity.
Right.
And he was just mentioning, I personally saw one day, was looking at all the network available, and one was saying FBI vehicle number 5, which I thought was very funny. But at the end of the day, is using your own VPN and taking all those measures to try to reduce the 100% risk-free. I don't believe it exists, but being cautious and doing all the preparation, that's something we can do.
So planners have to be IT specialists too, on top of everything else.
See?
Right?
Yeah, well, it's responsibility.
Yeah. And let's move on to another topic. And we've been covering these. We just recently picked our kind of 5 major topics of the year and interviewed some experts, including Eric on it. And Joshua, you write on a lot of this stuff too, constantly. But meetings too, the whole issue there with sexual harassment in the meetings industry. How can people guard against that? I know a lot of people say, really, one of the first big problems is you got an open bar at a lot of these, and does that put a planner or their organization in jeopardy? And what are you hearing out there, and how can they guard against legal liability and make it not happen in the first place? Because that's what we all want,
Right. Want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. Well, first of all, issues about sexual harassment go on in every industry, not just the meeting industry. The difference with us is, you said, there are events with alcohol, there are hotel rooms involved, people are away from home, so they tend to let loose. So that's why one reason we talk about it. It's important for any organization hosting a meeting to have some sort of code of conduct about what behavior is acceptable. Not just about harassment, but anything. Is bullying, cyberbullying prohibited? That can be in there. Do we allow smoking? Do we allow cannabis smoking if it's legal in the place that you're meeting? All sorts of conduct, and this should be one of them. Organizations should set up a mechanism where if someone feels they've been treated inappropriately, if they've been harassed, they should have a way to report it. And then the organization should take steps to separate the alleged harasser from the alleged victim, so that both sides feel safe, both parties feel safe, and then they can do an investigation if they're able to do it in the time that the meeting's going on, and take appropriate action. If someone's found to have behaved inappropriately, that person should be removed from the meeting, maybe removed from the organization, whatever it is. But again, the bottom line here is that people should know what conduct is appropriate, what isn't. Organizations should have ways to investigate it and take appropriate steps. If you sweep it under the rug, that's where you set yourself up for lawsuits, besides the fact that if word gets around that it's free reign at your meetings, some people may not attend your meetings because they won't feel comfortable.
Yeah.
So just to build on that, first of all, I think it's very important. I think it's great, like Sarah and Courtney initiative, what they're doing. And I think, quite frankly, to speak on that topic, I wish we would have a woman speaking with us, because we're an industry of 80% women.
Right.
And it's not only the Me Too movement. If you look at the panel, we're only 2 in the panel with you, but if you look at a lot of panels in industries, like what happened at the CES was only men, white, male panel. That is something that has to change. Now, going back to what you just say, open bar, if we have to now be responsible for the behavior of individual, I think it's going too far.
Right.
You have an open bar, it's great. I mean, you have to be the person who's controlling yourself, not the organizer, not providing any open bar, any nothing. You're the person, you're the individual, the human being who's responsible for yourself. So on one hand, I think it's extremely important that we have this movement, that people are aware of it. On the other hand, I'm always cautious, coming from Europe, how you look at things, especially this topic is a little different. There's one a major association in our industry that has a training for the chapter leaders, and they were asking questions: is it okay to say this, or is it okay to do that? And they had 3 colors: green, okay; orange, red, definitely not. And they told me that in the room with the same question, regardless of the genders, depending on where people were coming from Europe, from the US or Canada, they had totally opposite answers,
Right.
which is, I think, was interesting. And last night I was speaking with a great friend of mine, and she was telling me it's becoming very interesting in her own organization. She told me, I'm a hugger. I like to hug people. And now even that, people said, is that okay if I... So,
And it's a notorious industry for hugging. I mean,
exactly.
yeah.
And so it is extremely important, and it has to, the awareness, the regulation, the code of conduct.
And respect people's space, I think,
Exactly.
is
On the other hand, just don't go to the extreme. When, coming back at be a proper human being.
Right. And I think also I've heard too, especially with the open bar issue, it's important to have licensed bartenders who know when to not to overserve people. Some people say you give out drink coupons, but I mean, I think in a legal sense you need to take those precautions beforehand.
Yeah, well, I see alcohol consumption being more of a liability issue with people causing injury to the physical injury.
And driving afterwards,
Yes, right,
what have you,
right.
yeah.
But having said that, the issue, people need to take responsibility for themselves, for their
Sure.
own proper behavior. And I would say in a group of 1,000 people, 990 people know what's appropriate in
Yeah.
any meeting.
Right.
But the issue is that, and I think what we're talking about is that people are now expect, and I think rightfully so, the meeting organization, the one hosting the meeting, to take responsibility for enforcement and making sure everyone feels welcome at the meeting and not harassed. And that's really, I think, what we're talking about,
Absolutely, yeah.
and why it's now incumbent upon, if there's a doubt, not everyone's guilty that someone says has harassed them. And it may be innocent conduct, an innocent hug, but an organization now, we're at the point where you have to take the steps to investigate. If someone says, I don't feel welcome, I feel like I was treated inappropriately, you need to investigate. And don't kick Bob out right away. You do if Bob behaved inappropriately, and
Yeah.
that's the way to do. But make sure that Bob and Sally, who he allegedly harassed, are not forced together at the next event until you've seen what's going on.
Right.
And I think that's what organizations need to do. Just address it.
And what do you see in these codes of conduct? I think, is there any sort of unifying theme in there?
Things that proper behavior you should have learned in 5th grade.
Yeah, that your parents should have taught you like when you were growing up. I guess.
Look, those of us who've been around at any not just meeting industry, anything, have probably seen lots of inappropriate or questionable behavior over the years. Now we're listing what it is because we're now at a point where it's no longer okay for an organization to just ignore that behavior if it's inappropriate. They need to take a look and make sure everyone again feels welcome.
Yeah.
And so a code of conduct, again, and it varies for organizations. Alcohol, do we allow alcohol? Do we allow smoking? Again, as I said before, do we allow marijuana smoking? Do we regulate social media on our organization platform?
Because this can happen before a
Firearms.
face-to-face meeting,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
Firearms. It's also, you have a
Right.
checklist, so if someone violates it, you can take appropriate action.
Yeah.
I think just for me to conclude on that topic, it's weird that in 2019 we have to speak about that. And
Yeah.
I would say finally we're speaking about it. It's 80% women industry.
Right.
I mean, we should be the one who try to be welcome. So it's kind of insane to me. But at the end of the day, as you said, just be a proper human being. And it's the relationship with people.
And I think it's wonderful that we're having a dialogue about it, so people recognize that it is an issue that needs the attention of everyone.
Right.
More than a dialogue. I mean, I have
Yeah.
3 daughters. I want them, if they work in this industry, whatever industry, I want them to be able to feel safe in any type of environment, and especially in the industry I'm in.
Yeah.
Right.
And let's move on to risk management. You watch the news and it's terrible. I mean, there's active shooter scenarios, natural disasters. I mean, this is a critical topic. And everyone saw the terrible news from Las Vegas in October 2017 with the active shooter. What do organizations and meeting planners need to know about this? How can they protect their organizations and then their attendees also?
Okay, well, as you said, there have been some very high-profile incidents, but this really is nothing new. Risk management, we've always had it because of issues like the shooting in Las Vegas. There was the video game conference in Jacksonville, or tournament, where there was the Pulse nightclub in Orlando.
Yeah.
There's just been more and more.
Anywhere people gather, yes. A lot of people, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then there's the potential everywhere else. So where we are as an industry, I think now, is that no matter how big or small your meeting is, you have to think about risk management. And as you said, it's not just shootings. It's bad weather, hurricanes, earthquakes, fires, wildfires in California. It's cybersecurity as well. So what I suggest that people do, and again, if you have a big meeting, a high-profile meeting, later today we're going to be talking about the G20 summit, the government leaders that was here in Pittsburgh, you got to do more. Yeah. But any meeting probably has an obligation to at least look. And it starts at the RFP stage, where you can ask the questions. What do you anticipate our security needs based on our meeting? You do site visits, take a look around, walk around the neighborhood where the meeting venue is. Mm-hmm. What issues do we see here? Is there a history of cyber theft in the facility? Pre-event planning, taking a look, your walkthrough, does the condition of the facility look good? Is there an event plan the venue will share with us? Then in your contract, you allocate responsibility by contract. Who's responsible for physical security? Mm-hmm. What will the hotel or venue provide? Do we need to add to that? Do we need a professional AV company that will help ensure our networks aren't tapped into? Indemnifications again, so the responsible parties will accept that responsibility. And then but also an emergency plan is important. What if there's a disaster? How do people react? How do people who aren't at the meeting communicate with our attendees and all that sort of thing if something happens? So we hope nothing will happen. Vast majority of meetings, nothing will happen, but the key is to be prepared.
And building on that, if you imagine a few years ago, we were in a seminar on risk management, somebody said, give me in theory, something that could happen. And somebody said, there's a volcano in Iceland is going to explode and the entire airspace in Europe is going to be shut down. And you would say, that's a very creative one. Thanks. Let's be more realistic. Well, yeah. I was faced with that. Right. And we had 5 programs the next week. So I think it's all the preparation. Everything you say, I concur with it. And obviously the legal part as well. Now, the thing is, how do you operationalize that? How do you make sure that when it happens, people know what to do? You're talking about, active shooter. I'm from Parkland. My daughter was in the school.
That's right.
So that's ring close from home. But it's all the preparation. And schools obviously is a different topic. I think we should do much more in this country for that. But that's another discussion. But for meeting planners, when you look at your own team, what do you in the case of an active shooter? Run, hide, fight. If you haven't been trained, you might not know that. And even if you've been trained, you have to be put in a situation, a fake situation, but you can really build this muscle memory of knowing what to do.
Right.
You know who's responsible, great, but who has the authority to decide of evacuation of the venue? You have this initiative now under IAVM about securing convention center and be in line with the Safety Act Office of the Department of Homeland Security. How do you train your people? What do you say to people in general? And at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, it's the world we live in.
Right.
Do I like it? No. Do I have different reaction? Absolutely. I was in the airport. I won't name the airport, but I was waiting in the check-in line, and I see an unattended luggage. And immediately I look around. Nobody said, "Who does that belong to?"
Right.
Very loud. And the gentleman looked at me and said, "Oh, it's probably nothing." And then I looked at him and said, "Probably?" And I said, "No, you're right."
Yeah.
So I called the person from the TSA, And I felt immediately more secure because they stand just in front of that luggage, call their colleague, and just stand like that. I mean, this is not what you should be doing. So, in the world we live in, we have to have different reaction. You have to be more aware of the surrounding. It doesn't mean more stress, it's just a habit.
Yeah.
And that is something that needs to be communicated on a regular basis. It can happen anywhere.
And you've planned a lot in the international arena, as
Right.
we've talked about too, and they've been dealing with terrorism attacks
Yeah.
for probably longer than we have here. What have you learned over there? How do they do things there that we should be considering here?
The first thing that I learned, which is kind of scary, people have a short memory.
Yeah.
And I was in Brussels when there was the attack at the Jewish Museum. And 3 months after, it's kind of, even people that would have been involved was like, yeah,
Right.
it's unfortunate, but it can happen anywhere. So to your point, in Europe, we had all those terrorist organizations in the 80s and the 90s.
And
So
even in the 70s, I mean, forever,
yes,
really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's the preparation. It's training people, it's communication, and it's making sure that you do all the analysis at the beginning. Who is your customer? Is it a customer that it's at risk or is very visible?
Or a controversial
Absolutely.
topic they might be discussing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Who are you liaising with? So I always had in my team somebody who's like an expert in the field that would liaise with the local law enforcement. Yes, you have your emergency plan, but how is it executed? So that's the most important to me, is when things happen, who's doing what?
And maybe really quickly, what is the concept of like duty of care? And how does that enter into the situation here?
Well, duty of care, it's a legal term,
Yeah.
which means that the meeting organizer has an obligation to take all precautions that a reasonable person would take to protect the attendees and others as part of the meeting. And if we're professionals in the industry, that duty may be heightened than if someone's just planning a family wedding.
Yeah.
So you need to do the things we talked about. Anticipate the risks, check out the venues, take appropriate precautions. We're never going to prevent every incident. I'd like to think we will, but we won't. And in fact, the way our American legal system works here is that if someone is injured, their lawyer will allege that you should have done more than you did.
Right, no matter what.
It's just
Yeah.
the way it goes.
Yeah.
So the duty of care, though, is to do what a reasonable person would do. If I could just throw one other point that just came to mind while I was listening to the conversation. We're talking about, by and large issues and issues at big meetings, but and where there's physical security threats. Someone who's planning a small meeting, a corporate meeting, might say, "How does this relate to me?" And just like really quickly, cyber security. I've been involved with a number of corporate meetings where they have proprietary information that they're circulating via the internet. So that's where cybersecurity comes into play, and also. Are there AEDs, automated defibrillators on
Right.
site? So if someone has a heart attack, does someone know CPR? I recommend to planners that you make sure that a venue has someone who knows CPR available and you have their contact information during your meeting. Same with AEDs. They've become standard practice. So if a place doesn't have them, maybe you want to bring one. So just some thoughts about how this applies to smaller meetings as well.
And it goes back to the meeting planner that needs to have so many area that she or he has to look at, and working with the right partner in every field. But this is something that to me it's obvious. The risk management. This is something that you started doing. You start doing it even for your own business. What are the risks of people working with you because you're a small firm? If you're a small firm, but obviously I'm talking for independent meeting planners. And then you move on to who is the customer, what is the location, all the point we mentioned. You as an independent meeting planner should be thinking about it. You should not be responsible ultimately, but you should be responsible for finding the right people for all those areas. That's your role.
All right, well, let's move on to the subject, especially this relates to really your experience and what you're doing now, commission cuts, especially, independent planners have really been hit by this. Up to 30% of their revenue streams, a lot of them have been cut because the commissions have been cut from 10 to 7% at 3 or 4 of the major hotel chains now. What do independent planners need to know? What strategies do they need to employ to to remain successful?
I got 2 hours for that? Well, first of all, to your point, even if you don't lose a client, you're losing 30% of your revenue.
Right off the top, yeah.
If your revenue are only based on commission.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. Diversify. Find other service that you can provide to your client. Second thing is find another way of invoicing. In 20 years that I had my own cooperative and agency, we never count on the commissions from the hotel to make the revenue. It was always or deducted or put as a special success fee pot based on agreed KPIs.
Right.
And so if you compare with a lot of debate, and I have also interesting discussion with friends and large organizations.
It's a hot button issue.
It is. At the end of the day, I compare with the airline industry and the travel agents.
Right.
Did the travel agents totally disappear from the surface of the earth? No.
They became a lot more specialized.
They became more specialized and became bigger.
And consolidated,
I think it's a totally different ballgame if you're a major player with millions of, some of them billions of processing revenue, or what do you call it?
Yeah.
They manage a lot of money, a lot of inventory, and there's a different story than if you're an independent meeting planner.
Right.
If you're an independent meeting planner, I am totally convinced that you need to revise the way you're operating your business. Look at the business model in a different way. And at the end of the day, what type of service can you add to your customer, and have that conversation? Some people will say, listen, you never charge me anything, I'm not going to pay now. But at the end of the day, you have to explain them that one way or another, they were paying for it. And so at the end, the ultimate measure is how much do they pay for their entire meeting.
Right.
And so you have to have a conversation with your customer. You have to explain to them the structure. You have to explain to them the change in the industry. And most importantly, you have to explain to them the value you bring to them. If you're not bringing any value to me, why should I keep on working with you?
Right.
So,
you have to market your services better.
Correct.
Right? Yeah.
So one, look at the type of services you're offering. 2, look at the business model you're having. And 3, look at the future, what kind of business you want to have, and what kind of service you want to be providing. This is something to me that is not going away. I won't be surprised if over the years this keeps going down.
Yeah.
And again, the market will be divided by the large organization. And the smaller one, I believe, cannot survive if they only work on commission. I don't see that's possible.
Yeah, and Josh, what kind of legal issues are involved here?
Well, it's hard to add.
It's kind of a done deal, right? What can you do about it?
Look, the way I see it, and I deal with some independent planners, and it's not a great situation, but in a way, it's an opportunity to fix some things in the industry. I mean, I think part of the issue is for planners who've been working strictly on commission, they may not be valued appropriately by their clients. Clients aren't paying them, so they don't value what the planner does. And so it's a matter of planners educating their customers as to what they do and how they do it, and what their costs, what their various costs are. And then once you've educated your customer, I think it creates an opportunity to say, this is what we should get paid. Maybe you can have the rebate that the commission that the hotel pays, but here's how much revenue, here's what we need to charge for the meeting one way or another. And that also, by the way, if the meeting gets canceled, I've dealt with a number of independent planners where they plan a meeting and then the meeting gets canceled, so there's no commission. And are they walking away getting absolutely nothing? Because we all know how much planners do before a meeting.
Yeah.
So if you're paid differently, it creates a mechanism for you to be paid through, even if the meeting's canceled. And obviously you need a contract to do that. The other thing is, it's possible to be creative with our hotel partners and others who pay commissions. Some are still paying 10%. Some are paying more than 10%.
Right, sure.
Possibly there are some that are known to offer rebates and other things instead of commission in order to get business.
And some of them that work with you, maybe, huh?
I'm not mentioning names or companies.
All right.
But the point is that it's not even though the major hotel companies have made announcements about what they're going to pay, each hotel or many hotels are independently owned, and their owners have some flexibility. Just like, every few years the industry says every hotel company says we're going to create a master contract. So it's everyone knows what contract, if you're doing business with a Marriott or a Hilton, what you're getting. That never works. Why? With all due respect to my hotel friends, it usually doesn't work. Why? Because every hotel is independently owned, and it's ultimately up to the owners to decide what's in their contracts, or many of them are independently owned. So this works the same way. I think people will find flexibility, but if there's a little bit of a silver lining, as Eric said, there's a chance to demonstrate your value and what services you provide, so it can help your relationship with your customers, and again, they'll value what you do. And I think if people do a great job, I would hope they're not going to lose business in the long run.
Yeah, I
everyone's
totally
in the
agree.
same boat.
Totally agree with that, and I think there's a change in the industry.
Yeah.
And that is something. If I give another example, Sony Music was one of our clients in the late 90s, early 2000. And I remember the president of the Benelux division telling me that they were competing with the smartphones. And I went, what?
Right.
Because most of their revenue would come from younger generation that has a certain amount of money to spend, and instead of buying music, they would invest in having their smartphone more data or download music on the phone.
They would steal the music.
They would steal the music with Napster, the big and absolutely.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if you compare the Sony Music of this world with the hotel,
Yeah.
and then if you compare with all the distribution that record company had, with all those stores all over the place that have disappeared,
Yeah.
and then you do the parallel. The industry is changing.
Massive disruption in every industry, including ours. Yeah.
Correct. Whether we like it or not, that's not the point.
Right.
The point is, it is changing. So, as an independent meeting planner, what am I going to do to stay in business, to diversify my business, to change my business model, to still provide value? We keep saying that when we meet, we change the world, and I do believe it. At the end of the day, that has to have a price. And if your customer don't look at you as providing value and just look at you as providing logistics or being there, basically not understanding what you do, then I think it's also your responsibility to sit down with your customer, to explain what you're doing, and to go back to why is that they are putting the meeting together. And if you have that language, then they would understand the value you have.
And I got to put in, I guess, a little pitch for our magazine meetings today. Your Independent Life column, you cover these issues every month for us. So
yeah, thank you for the opportunity for writing that. Yeah.
So let's move on. I mean, one of the huge issues, and I don't think it's over, is hotel strikes and labor actions. I've been covering that a lot. It was Marriott. I think it was maybe 8 major destinations, and they finally settled. I mean, it wasn't really too protracted, I guess, in my mind. But I think the hotels have been doing some good business the last few years, and following that disastrous 2008 calamity of the Great Recession. What do planners need to know about protecting their meetings from labor disruptions, and what is your guys' take on the situation? I mean, do you think it's just gonna get worse or continue?
Well, labor contracts are a fact of life, and we would hope that things are subsiding now, but you never know, and in particular cities, particular properties, things come up, independent of the national strikes.
Right.
So I think that, and this affects groups differently. Some groups, frankly, don't care. If there's a labor strike, I mean, they care only to the extent if they're not getting the services that they expect to have. But, you know, they don't care. Other groups are more sensitive. Their members may not cross a picket line.
Right.
So if there's a strike, it's a major concern. And in that event, maybe it should be in a clause in the contract that allows them to cancel if there's a strike.
What kind of an example of a clause?
Well, it's not a force majeure, particularly, because it's within the control. A strike is generally within the control of the
It's a
property.
man-made incident.
Yes, they could pay their workers more, and they would come back to work. And you know, this brings up, without going off too much of a tangent, there are different kinds of labor disputes. I was involved with a lockout situation where a lockout is where a company locks out their employees, tell them not to come to work. So if they tell their employees not to come to work, should they be able to say, we can't perform and we're excused like in a force majeure? It was under their control. So there ought to be a clause that deals with it, and in that event gives the meeting group, an opportunity to either to ask questions and to either cancel if that's what it is, or the hotel should take measures if the services won't be at the level they expect. Maybe there'll be some concessions that the property will take. You know, so just to go back, if a group won't cross a picket line, if there's a strike, then they need to cancel. There's also been situations, and planners need to be careful with this. Maybe the planner isn't concerned about a strike and your group will cross a picket line, so there's no reason to cancel, but I've been in a situation where their main speaker is a public official and they don't want to come to a property that has a picket line set up. So what do? That was the main part of the meeting, and that caused a problem for this group.
And not to go off on a tangent too, but the government shut down right now. That's an issue with speakers and attendees.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And of course, not a labor dispute as we're talking about, but absolutely, that would be a force majeure because it's a government act.
Really?
In many situations. If your meeting is largely federal contractors and that sort of thing, because they can't
There's
travel.
nothing you can do humanly possible to plan around that, right?
They're not being paid. They're not able to come to work. They can't come to meetings. And it's unfortunate, but fact of life. So again, this is another situation where a planner should anticipate, ask questions at time of site visits and things. Are you a union property? You can put in the contract, you need to let us know when your contracts are up. You need to let us know if you anticipate a work stoppage, and the properties will let you know, but planners have to stay on top of that. And then anticipate what you would need to do if things happen. Do we need to cancel? Do we need assurances from the property that management or other people can be brought in to give us the services that we expect? Whatever the remedy would be. But again, pre-planning, like in everything else, is key.
So you're asking the guy from Europe about strike?
It seems like every time I go over there's like a rail strike or an airline strike. Or
yeah, you know, I just want to build on. I obviously agree with everything you just said, and I would say, when the strike happens and you're faced with it, the point is you've been planning for months. There's a lot of people coming, so there's a big investment for the organization. What you do at that moment, the legal part is covered. It's okay. Now, what do we do? Do we have backup plan? Can we move to another property?
Right.
You have I had a strike from an airline that was announced, and we didn't know which day it was going to be. So you have to have solution, and each solution has a cost. Then sit down with your clients and are you ready to do that or not? This part of the preparation. Now there is no silver bullet in that.
Yeah.
The question becomes, when the strike is happening, what do you do? And so you have the legal part, you have the preparation, and you sit down with the customer. These are the solution. This is the cost. What do we do? It's a partnership.
Right. You know, I just, do you think it's going to get worse? Or, I mean, I just think that labor is uneasy now, and they have, I got to say, you know, a lot of those workers, they have a hard job if you're making up rooms, and, you know, it's maybe they got a legitimate gripe in some respects. I guess that's not for me to say, but.
I think it's a fact of life that the uncertainty is a fact of life.
Yeah.
We have some states where there's minimum wage legislation.
Right.
Some and states and localities that they're against it, and it's creating a disparity. Housekeepers in one city might make $8 an hour and in another make 15 because that's the thing. So I think it's preparation is the key because we don't know. And by the way, given what's going on now, and if people see this 6 months from now, hopefully they'll laugh and say, why are we concerned with this? But we have the government shutdown now, and TSA workers at the airport are not being paid, but they have to go to work. And to those sorts of things, if this shutdown lingers on, are there going to be sick outs, which I think we're beginning to see more of that.
Yeah.
And it's not a strike or a labor dispute, but there's not sufficient people there to help your attendees at the airport. So we're getting into all these gray areas that people have to really, planners need to think about it.
And it could be, just parts of your meeting that are affected, right? And you expect a standard of service.
Yeah.
If X service is not delivered, you might have a case to ask for a concession, or
Yes.
what is your recommendation? Do you have to spell everything out in your contract like that, I guess?
Well, when you've been doing this for...
Well, we'll put your card up on the screen.
Yeah,
again.
thank you. It's the second time you've offered. Everyone has a comfort level.
Yeah.
And what I see, and particularly when I've been involved with meetings in Europe and outside of the U.S., they say, Americans love to put everything in contracts and they're too long. But the contracts I see from Europe now are just as long.
Right.
But
Because they're working with people
yes.
from the U.S.
Well, that's exactly it.
Did they give us GDPR in return for that?
But what it is you learn lessons based on the past. So we're talking about the quality if there's a labor dispute.
Yeah.
I've had this very issue where there was a quality issue caused by insufficient labor. Now, what did the hotel's lawyer argue? I did this for a medical group I was representing. The hotel's lawyer said, there's nothing about quality in the contract. What are you buying when you buy a hotel room? A bed, a bathroom, some towels, and that's pretty much it. What else is there in the contract? Mm-hmm. So now I recommend to clients that we say this property is a 4-diamond property, and we've either taken pictures of the property at the time we enter into the contract, or we reference the hotel's website, which is an accurate depiction of what the property looks like at the time we're contracting,
right.
And also any statements about quality of service. We give you white glove service, that's now attached to the contract. We don't put it all in, but we say this is what this is the service level.
Yeah.
So if what you're getting because of a labor dispute or just because the hotel downsizes in terms of employees, if they give you less of a product, it now becomes something that's actionable, that you can make a demand and either hopefully have the hotel respond and up their level of service. But if not, there are other remedies. But the long and the short is, unfortunately or not, this is where we are, because otherwise there's this wiggle room.
Right.
And I would add a more human side of it to the legal part. It's obviously everything that Josh said, I fully concur with it. And I would say if you're in the best property with white glove service and there's a strike coming in, my concern for my customers is, can we still have the meeting? Can we deliver on the messaging?
Yeah.
Can we reach the objective of the meeting? And if we have a little less of service, I'm not necessarily, I'm gonna sit down with the client, but I'm not necessarily gonna think, oh, I can sue them for this and that,
right.
Because I wanna go back to that property.
Sure.
I understand the situation. The main goal for me is, are we delivering on the outcomes and the objective of the meeting? That's the most important from the moment that we are prepared legally, for sure.
And this is the degree of what you're right, what your clients
Correct.
expect. So in the situations where this come up, and the answer isn't to sue for damages afterwards, although that's always a possibility. It's more of to make it right beforehand. So we have a criteria that if we see an issue, if the property's not the way it should be, the service stinks, the facility has gone downhill, then you can say to the property, the first step, a few months beforehand, we've noticed this, we want you to make sure that you fix it before our meeting. That really is the goal of this. Now, have I worked with clients who say, we want one bartender for every 20 guests because our people don't want to wait in line more than 30 seconds for a drink? So yeah, I've had those, and they put that in the contract.
Right.
But that's not most people. So Eric is absolutely correct. It's more of a sense of what kind of service the hotel should provide, and if they're not providing exactly, maybe that's less. But this deals with where it's really fallen off.
You know, an example come to mind, the difference between the U.S. and Europe in terms of law. We had a program in Miami years ago with a big pharma company from Europe, and we arrived with a client with an inspection, and the next day we were meeting with the head of a transportation company. And he said, "How was last night?" I said, "Oh, it's great. You know, we had the limo coming up. The driver was there on time. He knew very well the city. You had put the favorite drink of my customer in the car. It was perfect." I thought with all those glamour thing, it's unfortunate that we had plastic cup. And he looked at me and said, "I understand, but 3 months ago I had a bunch of kids renting the limo for some kind of party. They get drunk, they broke the glass, they cut themselves, and they sue me." And I was like, what? In Europe, and my wife is a lawyer, and she would tell you, A, if you cut yourself, I mean, you're not going to think of suing anybody else, but you're responsible for it.
Yeah, you're
B,
drunk and you cut yourself.
You're right. B, you're not going to find a lawyer who will think, and even if you do, C, you will never find a judge that will accept that.
Yeah.
And this is obviously a small example, but if you extrapolate that to the approach of contract, of a strike and risk, it's a different approach.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, our American legal system sometimes takes these things far. You know, you look at examples like in the unfortunate situation a few months ago in Chicago, where someone was killed at the Merchandise Mart when they were the trappy, the swing.
Yeah.
You know, that was very unfortunate, and it sounds like it was an accident, but there is or will be all sorts of litigation involving all sorts of parties because of that. And the unfortunate thing, and maybe not in Europe, but here in the U.S., you need the plan. The Las Vegas shooting, you know, there have been. Forget about, because you may know the hotel company is now proactively suing some of the victims for reasons we don't need to go into now, but the defendants in the lawsuit will include all sorts of corporate entities who probably had almost nothing to do with security, but they're there because they might have peripherally borne on some sort of liability, but also because they have the money to pay a settlement.
Yeah.
And that's the way our system works sometimes.
Yep. Well, we're getting ready to wrap up our program today, but let me throw it over to Josh here to kick off. We have the big finish. Josh?
We're talking about cannabis use?
Yeah.
Okay. Tyler told me he wanted to end on a high note, so here we are.
All right. Excellent. So how does cannabis enter into this whole thing?
Well, cannabis, marijuana, is now legal in 10 U.S. states for recreational use. It is also legal in Canada, and it may be legal in other parts of the world. And it has become a fact of life at meetings. Either attendees go to a meeting in the states where it's legal, and it includes California, Colorado, and other popular meeting states. Yeah. And they want to use marijuana recreationally. Or there are even places where it's decriminalized. Marijuana may not be legal. Like here in Pennsylvania, it is not legal, but some cities have decriminalized it, meaning that you won't get arrested for it. And your attendees, because maybe they're from states where it's legal, frankly, they think it's legal here. They don't care.
Yeah.
Now, why is this a meeting industry issue? Because it's just like alcohol consumption. Your people you may be at an event that actually makes cannabis available to attendees, and I've seen cannabis concierges that will come to meetings in Colorado in particular.
Really?
They're advertised on the web. Everyone should, after this is over, go take a look. They are licensed. You can go to them.
But you're leaving the meeting at that point, right?
Some meetings may bring it in. It's legal. It's an option, just like bringing in alcohol. That's right. It's not legal in Pennsylvania. As a member of the bar here, I feel the need to tell you.
How about West Virginia? We're close to that.
I don't know. Yeah. But the other thing is that you may, as a planner, have and we're not totally there yet, but planners may have a responsibility, if you know that your attendees are using it, to take precautions, because if you get high, you may get in the car and drive just like with alcohol.
Look at it like alcohol.
So what I suggest to people, the responsibility is, if you either furnish the marijuana or you know what's going on, you need to make sure that your attendees are not in a position where they can hurt themselves or others.
Right.
So treat it like because the law is too new. Treat it like alcohol use. Discourage them from from having too much. Discourage them from getting in cars. Don't have the ultra hazardous trapeze activity right after you know people. If you know people are outside smoking, don't have the hazardous activity right after that. And maybe you want to, in part of a code of conduct we told off earlier, advise people that they shouldn't do it at your meeting or at your property, even outside.
Right.
Because then if something does happen, it may show that you would try to address the issue. But again, it's legal. It's going to be legal in more places probably. It's something we need to deal with.
And you probably have a lot of people that aren't kind of familiar with that or have experience with that. And I've even heard of some people that talk about F&B in the industry. They talk about edibles, right?
Yes.
And that's like, I could never imagine the liability of including that in a meeting.
That's becoming insane with that.
Yeah.
I would say, to Josh's point, it's like alcohol, it's whatever you do in your life is your life.
Yeah.
And be responsible for it. If you drink, don't drive. If you smoke, don't drive.
Yeah.
It's insane. What's interesting is I heard a friend from a very large AV company where they had some regulation, and in one state it's illegal and they have to take blood test, and it's in the contract. And then the same people that are from that state are going on an event, on a project in another state where it is legal. And when they smoke, and then they're going back to the state when it's illegal and get the blood test. So what do you do in that case? A lot of work for the lawyers,
Yes.
but at the end of the day, to me, it's you're a human being. Be responsible, and whatever you do in your life, it's your life. To just don't put yourself and the others in danger.
Yeah.
Right. That's exactly correct. Of course, our legal system, again, though, allows people to try and voice responsibility on others, which is why we have this discussion.
Yeah.
Let me just say one other thing, which I think is important, because I got asked this at another presentation. Someone said, I'm going to a meeting in California, and it's legal in California. And so I partake, smoke marijuana, have some edibles, and then I go back home. My company drug tests me, and they have a policy that no drugs. They drug test me, and I'm found positive, and I get fired. Well, the answer to that is your company has a drug policy. No matter whether it's legal where you use the marijuana or not, you violated their policy. So the fact that it's legal doesn't save you. And people need to be careful. And again, it's a matter of personal responsibility.
Yeah.
But think about that. You might be at a meeting for business. If your employer expects you to be drug-free, you need to be drug-free.
Excellent. Well, I think we're going to wrap up today's presentation. Thank you guys. Enlightening conversation. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
And thank you to the Grand Concourse Restaurant here in Station Square for making this space available for us. And thank you guys for joining us. We're here with Craig T. Davis, President and CEO of Visit Pittsburgh. Thanks for joining us.
Of course, thank you.
And thank you for sponsoring this free broadcast today and letting us all bring this free education to meeting planners.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
And so far, the PCMA Convening Leaders has been a great success. You get a chance to show off the destination to a lot of real top shelf meeting planners. But for those who might not have been able to come here and see Pittsburgh, what do you think are the benefits of the city?
Well, it's truly an honor to have PCMA Convening Leaders 2019 in Pittsburgh. And for those that are not having an opportunity to see the city, what they might be missing is the type of a place. The topography of the city is very interesting, and we are not a flat city. It's very hilly, so you get a lot of beautiful vistas. So the city itself is gorgeous. It's a green city. It's full of forests. It's full of water. And what's really super unique about it is that there's 90 separate neighborhoods in Pittsburgh, and each one of them has a very different feel, different food, different churches, different architecture, different bars. So that there's just a diversity of that. But also, Pittsburgh is an incredibly friendly town, authentic and real. Having suffered what we did back in the 80s when we lost our steel industry, people have this sense of really embracing visitors. They want people to love them. And when somebody comes in to the city, they really want to embrace our visitors. So there really is, our local Pittsburghers is what we call them, are the ones that keep people coming back. Plus we have an incredible package of hotels and of course one of the nicest LEED Platinum convention centers in the world.
I was here when they were building it. You guys were nice enough to host a press trip.
Yeah.
It's been a while now, and PNC Park was just coming online then.
The PNC Park, Heinz Field, and the Convention Center were built all in the same couple of years, and then PPG Paints Arena followed about 6 years afterwards. So we have relatively new stadiums and relatively new convention center.
And any other big attractions or hotels coming online people should know about?
We're done with the hotel boom for a while.
Yeah.
About 3 years ago, Pittsburgh had the largest growth in hotel space per capita next to New York City. So we're still trying to consume that which that has been brought into the marketplace. So I think that the taste for that is a little bit past for the moment. But right now, there's just so many incredible things that are coming out. New restaurants every time we turn around, and Pittsburgh's accolades are getting. We're named the 19 coolest cities in Geographic Traveler magazine. We're the only city in America that got that distinction. So we're getting out in the press, out in the blogosphere about being an incredible food city, an affordable city, and we're the type of a place that is very easy, very walkable, very centrally located, and ideal for conventions.
And I know a number of people really mentioned, and I've heard this on more than a couple occasions, just coming through that tunnel from the airport and seeing that view. It's one of the most beautiful cities I've seen at night upon entering it.
Newspaper, and I think it was the New York Times, wrote years ago that we're the only city with a front door. And I think that that's actually true. Because to be very honest, the ride in from the airport to that point is very unspectacular. So you get kind of lulled into a false sense of, that this is just like any other city I've seen. And then when you go through that tunnel and what pops out on the other end is really spectacular.
The rivers and the bridges and all the lights.
And you're elevated, so you can see down into the city, and it's really, the skyscrapers and the water. It is a real beautiful sight to behold.
Excellent. Well, and I noted too that during the press conference today, you really once meeting planners come here and see the city, you really you get a lot of business from that. You convert a lot of them, right?
There is, that's kind of our secret sauce. We spend a lot of our time, our effort, getting people in to see the city, both convention planners and as well as travel writers, because we know that in many cases they may not have the highest of expectations, but when they see the city, it blows their socks off. And the city's workable. It's really, it's a kind of city you have to see, because it had a reputation 40 years ago in one way, and it is 180 degrees from that now. So our job is to reacquaint people. Even in PCMA, we asked a lot of people, have you been to Pittsburgh before? And about 60%, I can guess, have never been to Pittsburgh or haven't been here in the last 20 years. So it's a brand new visit for them. So this is an opportunity for us to reacquaint ourselves, or for the first time acquaint themselves with a city that really is up and coming.
Well, thank you for sponsoring this and joining us, and thank you all out there for viewing our on-location broadcast today, and have a great rest of the day wherever you are.